Republican-controlled legislature has refused to appropriate the money to test the fish. But in all the other states, some or most or all of them are unsafe to eat. According to CDC, 1 out of every 6 American women now has so much mercury in her womb, 1 out of every 6, that her children are at risk for a grim inventory of diseases: autism, blindness, mental retardation, heart, liver, and kidney disease. My levels of mercury are 2.5 times what EPA considers safe just from eating fish. And all of this could have been stopped except that Bush abolished the mercury rule. But but Americans don't know that. I go and buy my fishing license for $30 a year, every year in New York State, and I get the fish advisories, which are now this thick, that basically say there's only a few places where you can safely fish in New York State. I read through that thing and I'm saying, that son of a bitch, George Bush. But most fishermen who buy that thing don't make the connection. The reason that they don't make the connection is because there's no investigative reporters out there telling them about that connection. They also got rid of all the foreign news bureaus. When I was a kid, ABC had 47 foreign news bureaus in Europe. Now it has none. It buys its news in a can from the European producers. And that's why Americans, the only way that you can get foreign news in this country is if you go to BBC. And that's why Americans, we're supposed to be the leader of the free world, of the entire world. And yet, we have no idea what's happening in other cultures or other countries. And that's why the American people, were able to be gulled into this neocon fantasy that we were going to be met by flowers and rose petals in the streets when we went into Iraq. And because they have no obligation to promote the public interest, their only obligation is to their shareholders. They serve that obligation not by explaining the difficult issues that we need to understand to make rational decisions in a democracy, but rather by entertaining us, by appealing to the lowest common denominator, the prurient interest that all of us have in the reptilian core of our brains for sex and celebrity gossip. So they give us 3 weeks of Anna Nicole Smith, and they give us, Lacey Peterson and Kobe Bryant and, Michael Jackson and, and Brad and Janet, Brad and Angelina, and we know more about Kate and Tom than we do about global warming. And American people are today the best entertained and the least informed people on the face of the earth. And that has profound implications for our democracy, because a democracy cannot function long if it does not, without an informed public. And I've known this for many, many years. I've gone around the country. I do about 30 speeches a year in red states to Republican audiences. And I get the same reaction from Republican audiences that I do from liberal college kids. The only difference is that the Republicans come up to me afterwards and say, how come I never heard this before? And I'm like, it's because you're getting your news from Rush Limbaugh and from talk radio. And I came to this conclusion a long time ago that 80% of Republicans are just Democrats who don't know what's going on. And that in 2004, there was a survey done that Randy knows about and Greg, I'm sure, knows about, called the Piper Report. It was a survey by the Public Policy Institute of the University of Maryland. It was a national survey that confirmed my own anecdotal observations that I've been harboring for so many years about this phenomenon. Because you look on Sunday morning television, and the pundits, we call them in my house the Sunday morning gas bags, we're talking about the morality difference. The red states have this monopoly on morality, and the blue states are kind of dissolute and degenerate. And it didn't jive with my experience or my own observations. And in fact, I did a piece for Vanity Fair a couple of years ago where I went and did a survey. I asked my research assistant to look at the indicia of morality in the various states. And what they found was just the opposite was true, that, the lowest teen pregnancy rate was Massachusetts. The highest was Texas. The lowest divorce rate, Massachusetts. The highest, Texas. The 10 lowest divorce rate states, all blue states. The 10 highest, all red. The 10 lowest teen pregnancy, all blue. The 10 highest, all red. A red state resident is more likely to murder you, to commit a violent crime against you, to to impregnate your teenage daughter, you know, to watch Desperate Housewives on TV, to buy pornography, to play degenerate video games like Grand Theft Auto, et cetera, et cetera. So there was no that, you know, this difference didn't exist. And what the Pippa report showed is that, Pippa went out and they quizzed people based upon their knowledge of current events and their party affiliation. And what they found was that there was not a values deficit, but there was a huge information deficit among people who voted Republican. They found, for example, 70% of the people who said that they were going to vote, that had voted for George Bush, said that they believed that Saddam Hussein had bombed the World Trade Center. 70% believed that weapons of mass destruction had been found in Iraq. 65% said that they believed that the American invasion of Iraq was strongly supported on the Muslim street among Iraq's Muslim neighbors and by our traditional allies in Europe. 64% said that they believed that President Bush strongly supported the Kyoto Protocol and strong labor and environmental standards in our international treaties, which of course all of that is wrong. Then Pippa went back 2 more times. The second time it went back to find out where the source of the misinformation was. And invariably the people who had all this misinformation said that their primary news source was Fox News or talk radio. They went back a 3rd time to determine what people's essential values were. And they asked a series of hypotheticals. For example, they said, what if there were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq? What if Saddam Hussein had nothing to do with bombing the World Trade Center? What if the American invasion of Iraq was mostly opposed on the Muslim street and among our traditional allies in Europe? Should we have still gone in? 84% of Democrats and 84% of Republicans said the same thing. We should not. So there was no difference in the values. The only difference was in the information, and that is why it is so critical to have a working press in our country. And you know, when I did a piece on the fairness doctrine, again for Vanity Fair a couple of years ago, about a year and a half ago, and I went back and looked at the debates that occurred when the fairness doctrine was passed almost unanimously by Republicans and Democrats in 1928. And they recalled the initial debates at the beginning of our country, where there was a division between Jefferson, who wanted a universal franchise, he wanted everybody to vote, and Hamilton, Adams, and Madison, who wanted to restrict the vote to landed gentry. Not because they were snobs, not because they were undemocratic, but they believed that the great mass of uninformed, uneducated public would not be forthright in fighting to retain their civil rights that these guys had laid down their lives and their fortunes for. And they said, only an educated public who has a long view will do that. And Jefferson said that, Jefferson agreed, and Jefferson himself said, an uninformed public will trade 100 years of hard-fought civil rights for a half an hour of welfare, you know, to the first religious fanatic or demagogue or tyrant who comes along and promises them a $300 tax break. He didn't say that, the last part, but he said the first part. But that's what he was talking about. And he said the remedy for that is not to deprive the public of their rights, but rather to forcibly inform them, whether they want to be informed or not. And that's why the 13 colonies did something that nobody had done in history, which was to impose mandatory public education. So you would go to jail if you did not attend school. You were punished for it. And that's because, and you know, Jefferson in Virginia started all these educational institutes, the University of Virginia and other ones, to force people to understand current events and to understand philosophy and history and all these other things that we need to understand if we're going to retain our democracy.